What we're going to do today is listen to Wilhelm Reich talk about his work, talk about the issues that he felt were crucial to an understanding of his work, of the development of the science of orgonomy. Let me make a few comments, both historically and also about how I and Dr. Schiff, who's on the other end, who has explained to me he has a huge day today, so he's starting out real early. But these tapes were made, I don't know the specific dates. Unfortunately, they've been released as 6 CDs from the Wilhelm Reich Museum. And they are for sale. And so if you want the complete CDs, each one is about an hour. So there's 6 hours of seminars that Dr. Reich held. As far as I can locate historically, probably in the late, between 1947 and probably 51, or late 50s. The seminars were irregular. They often addressed different subjects, and Reich went through various configurations of how these seminars were to be held. At first, there was an attempt, as I understand, to establish a clinical seminar in which case presentations were done, in which Reich would discuss specific cases. I've heard some of those recordings. The story, which again is not documented as much as anecdotal, from Dr. Sobey and a couple of other of the practitioners, orgonomists who were present, was that Dr. Reich started the clinical seminar and held about 4 sessions and then abruptly discontinued them. The reason given, again anecdotally, was that each doctor would then come into his meeting with Dr. Reich after a seminar and talk about how wonderful the seminars were and how now they knew how to do orgonomy just like Dr. Reich. And then finally, after hearing enough of this, which will give you some idea of how Reich thought, he became irate and said, "That's it. No more seminars with Dr. Reich. All these are doing is producing a bunch of little Dr. Reichs who are afraid to do the work on their own and to develop their own style and their own." And he said, "I'm too powerful an influence, and there's too much mystical, attachment to me." So he stopped those seminars. However, he did continue ongoing seminars, which would be more correctly called, I think, technical or subject seminars on various aspects of his work and the work of orgonomy and presentation. These are the seminars from which I've excerpted. Now, the way I've done these excerpts is to choose themes that I thought were very important for a general audience. Much of the seminars on the CDs are at times very technical and really more appropriate to students or practitioners who have extensive knowledge in detail. But there are significant sections of the seminars that are very available and I think give a very strong sense of a number of factors in Reich's work. One, a strong sense of how he defined his work and how he understood orgonomy. And another thing which I was interested in presenting, I felt was worthwhile to present here, was how Reich himself operated and worked and how he taught. And I think that will be enlightening. We can comment and talk about that. And the other thing is that Reich specifically, it was interesting in that he presents on a subject, and often this is something that disturbed people with Reich's personal presentations and sometimes disturbs people in his writing. Reich's ideas, say, particularly in something like the mass psychology of fashion or particularly function of the orgasm, Reich feels that the specific subject is a moment from which one moves out and that it leads productively to other questions, and that once a new question or a new area is presented, you should not stop and say, "Oh no, we're talking only about X, so we can't even address Z, because Z was not the subject. He's not rigid at all. So very often it can be misleading. The title of a piece could be, as you'll see in the presentation, on schizophrenia, on the childhood the development of childhood integration in schizophrenia, and the vast majority of the presentation is really on child development and extremely enlightening work on his insights on the newborn and child development that Dr. Schiff and I were talking last night in preparation for this, and we both agreed that this, since it's an area that we're interested in and been involved in, that we heard stories about this, but to hear Reich himself, clearly he is a good 10 to 15 years ahead of what will become the revolution in child development studies. At the time that these tapes were made, nobody had yet published any work on in-depth, extensive child development research, either on the physical. This is a good probably 10 years before the publication of Peter Wolf's classics work on in 1959 on the physiology of the newborn, and certainly a good 7 or 8 years before the work of Robert Fance on ocular, or Bauer on hearing or interconnection. So there's a great deal of information that often comes up in ways that one would not necessarily find if you were looking specifically for a listing. So one of the things is, for those of you who then are interested in go and get the full set of CDs, I would strongly recommend that you listen to all of them, because sometimes the subject, as it's presented on the label, doesn't represent where Reich is going to take it in terms of what he has to say. So you'll get some flavor for that. And I think you'll be, for those of you who've never heard Reich's voice, I think you might be, at times, as I was, pleasantly surprised. He has a very, very... his English became very good very quickly, and his accent. I had always expected to hear this, sort of Herr Professor, very, sort of a parody of Sigmund Freud kind of, serious German. And in fact, it's a very lively, light kind of voice, which is the description that other people gave. The way I want to do this, I think, is I was playing between the idea of playing the whole. This is a selection made from all 6 tapes, okay? By far, and an additional tape that wasn't a CD, that wasn't part of this group, but I'll mention that at the end. It runs about 50 minutes, which is fine in terms of the work. But rather than play it straight through, I think that I will play segments, and then Dr. Schiff and I can make comments, and you can ask questions and discuss it. Because otherwise, I think it'll just, you'll sit there just sort of listening and become sort of inured to it rather than experience it in more lively interaction. So what we'll try is to play this starting from the beginning, and at appropriate moments I will stop it and make some comments myself, and let Dr. Schiff comment from Seattle, and then let you ask questions or comment. Okay, so let's see how our technological exploration proceeds. We're starting now. Dr. Schiff?
Yes.
Let us know if you hear this when it comes up. I'm not sure how much this will pick up for you, but
what I was planning to do is I will play those excerpts here.
Right. Okay, and I'll tell you when we're starting. So we're starting.
And another element of technology.
Right. So there's bi-coastal, CD interaction, and see if this is synchronized. Okay, starting now. Maybe.
The 3,000 years of natural scientific thinking is filled to 90% with the question, how do I think?
Let me just quickly, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just stop, and we will start again. Actually, someone had a participant here today, one of the people here today had asked, and I think that's appropriate. Let me try to tell you what each of these segments basically addresses, which I think will get you set to listen, so in case it gets fuzzy or the beginning comes from the first CD, which is on the approach to the subject of orgonomy, how one approaches it and what it's about. And the first couple of comments, they're in small segments, are on the nature of science. And I think Dr. Reich had some very important things to talk about when it came to how you do science. And he represents a crucial point historically, just to give you some sense of the history of science, that he is coming out of a tradition in science that is still deeply connected to the idea of natural science, that science is an empirical response and an attempt to organize and understand nature and natural phenomena. And that will crucially formulate and organize not only the directions he moves in, but the way he approaches ideas. So that in the true original tradition of natural science, one starts wherever one starts, looking at a raindrop, but if that leads you to looking at the planets, that's okay too. It really is all of a piece in terms of the way one approaches nature and the way one approaches phenomena. So that if one reads Galileo's works, which not too many people do anymore, but they do a lot of talking about it. But if one reads Galileo or the original Sir Francis Bacon, one will see, or Newton for that matter, one will see this kind of, or Darwin for that matter, or Freud, this tradition of sweeping engagement of nature and natural science and natural phenomena. So in that context is where we start again. Okay.
3,000 years of natural scientific thinking is filled to 90% with the question, how do I think? How is it possible that I can reach conclusions? How is it possible that I can see the world? Is it possible that I can distinguish things? It's not just looking out, oh, that's a lamb, that's light. You say a thing, nothing. You don't know anything when you say that's light.
I don't think Dr. Silva would be correct at such primary things. I think...
but it leads to this primary thing.
It would lead.
It would lead, that's what I mean.
But I think I understand that method of approach is a theory in itself.
No, the method of approach is a tool. And that's what you obtain by the method of approach. You approach certain phenomena with a certain method. Right? Is that clear? And then a result comes toward you. And this result is a theory. So the theory is the way in which you connect facts.
But getting specific, that method of approach is the character analytic.
That's the technical, yes.
Well, wasn't the character analytic approach based on theory?
No. The method grows out of the necessity to handle facts or phenomena which cannot be handled with other methods. You see, if you would try today, I'm very glad that you bring that question up. We should come back to our thing. That's very important to rehash. We should rehash again and again. The farther you go, the clearer it will be to you how these tools work. But you can't just work on things. A carpenter can't just do something or anything. He has to have a method of how to go at a piece of work. That's in every profession. We are not an exception from that. And that means he has to learn the difference. A flyer has to learn a certain method to handle a plane. That's method. The result is that he reaches the destination. Now that's the same thing in our thing.
Well,
we cannot just do something. We have to know what we are doing, how we approach the patient. We have to use a conscious method in order to reach a destination. So that's a difference between our work and many kinds of psychological work. Most psychologists have no method, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know even what they want to go at. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's...
of course.
Stop there. You'll see as I think these go along that they get a little clearer, and actually I think people can move closer up and come more around it if you want to hear it. They are actually fairly clear once you get used to it. But I think this is crucial in when Reich is talking about the method of approach. And if you missed it, one of the things I know some of the voices, some of the people I knew before they died. I think the person who talks there is actually Dr. Handelman. Could have been one of the Tropps brothers, all of whom were physicians. But what's going on here is that what Reich is saying is that what distinguishes really a specific science, for which he's making the argument that orgonomy is a specific science, is that you have a method of approach, and that method of approach is very clearly defined before you set out, and that you also have things that you're specifically prepared to look at, and a method for looking at them. In one sense, actually, I'm correct that. You don't necessarily have things that you're prepared to look at. You can look at anything. That what you need is a specific method for looking. That it's less significant what you look at than the method you bring to what to the process of looking. And that he then goes on to, often people think that he's very negative about psychology, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think what he's saying is that the failure of modern psychology, or of the direction that psychology was taking, certainly at the point that he was making these kinds of comments and tapes, was that it lacked a clear method. And in fact, if one looks at psychology today, most of my students over the years will comment like, I don't understand. This guy says you go this way, and this is the right way to do psychology, and this one says this is the right way to do psychology, and this one says, no, you got to go here, and this is, and that there's a lot of chaos and confusion, and the results are chaotic and confusing and limited in terms of what psychology can offer as a comprehensive, organized vision of phenomena, of natural phenomena. And in one sense, one of the great failures of psychology is that it often does not attempt or is not able to approach natural phenomena. It tends to approach a very, very limited area of phenomena. So that if one is trained to do psychological testing, that's what you do. You can't, as a tester or an evaluator, you can't look at the way a child holds his or her body. You can't look at the way a child engages, in social behaviors. You're there to look at the test and to grade the test and to process the paperwork on it. So that it produces a very, very limited access to natural phenomena, and therefore it removes human beings from their natural processes, and that becomes a central theme, I think, for Reich. And as we move along here, we will see Reich really begin to use this approach, I think, more effectively. That's why I made this selection. I don't know if Dr. Schiff has any comment.
Well, thank you. The one thought I had, or actually two thoughts. It seems that he's drawing on maybe an historical note.
You have to talk in louder.
Okay, he's drawing on a historical note in terms of the development of his character analytic technique. And I think there's a question of what a theory comes before. What comes first, theory or the approach which then develops the theory? And it reminds me of the history of how he developed character analysis, which was an attempt to deal with phenomena which could not be dealt with in traditional or then the emerging psychoanalytic approach. Namely, how do you get past or deal with these resistances? And in approaching these resistances and in finding out and in studying them, he then developed the theory of character analysis, but that was only an attempt, that was only as a result of trying to tackle with the phenomena that he was observing and then confronting. And so that's my comment.
Yeah, I think that's very, very apt. At one point, I think it is Dr. Handelman says, well, isn't character analysis initially a theoretical frame? He says, no. He said it emerges out of, exactly as Dr. Schiff is saying, emerges out of Reich's attempt to understand a problem. in the natural field. Basically, they would treat. They were treating patients, and he was treating them according to the way he was taught to do it, and it wasn't getting. It got some results, but it didn't get the results that they expected all the time. And so he started basically saying, "Okay, well, what could be explaining this?" And at the point that he asked the question, "How can we explain the fact that this doesn't work?" That's the approach that will lead to an explanation. And in simplest terms, an explanation is a theory, which then has to be tested. And that's basically natural science, as opposed to academic science, which says, this is my idea, let me see if I can prove it and publish it, in terms of building reputation. Yeah, comment here.
I think I heard him tell me if I'm right. Early on he said, when you're saying something is right, that means you don't know anything. Did he make that comment? Or like that?
Yeah, he basically it says in a number of places that you should never, and he admonishes the other participants. You'll hear him periodically admonish the students who, coming from the side of people I knew, like Dr. Sobey and others who were there, said that Reich was going to say no, and people would cringe. Oh, Dr. Reich said I was wrong. But he obviously didn't care that. He was just interested in the dialogue. But he does say that if you start out with the assumption that you're right, then you're wrong. That all you can really start out with in terms of the approach is that you're seeing some phenomena that catches your attention, or that you can't explain, or that you don't know what the answer is, and as a result of that, it proceeds and it encourages you to explore and to build, to establish an explanation, which then becomes a theory. Yeah.
Very, very briefly, it's an indication of how much of what he said was misunderstood by most people at that time. Mm-hmm. Theodore Reich has a huge article about Wilhelm Reich titled "The Royal Road to the Unconscious," in which he treats puts down, right? Because what he said he's doing is forming a very rigid approach to treating patients.
Can you hear me out there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm losing you.
Okay, you can't hear.
Then I stop hearing.
Okay.
Unless you're taking very long pauses.
No, are you hearing us now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just that people are, because the speakerphone isn't as good as we've had in the past.
Oh, we're speaking? Okay.
Yeah, the people are speaking from the audience, and you might not be picking it up.
Oh, I'm not picking up anything.
Okay.
But I'm sure that they're saying things that are very valuable.
If he's missing mine, he's missing very much.
Yeah.
That's what he said. They apparently...
Can you hear now?
No.
No, go just stand over there.
Apparently, people at the time misunderstood totally Reich's approach because they criticized him for being too dogmatic and trying to erect what Theodore Reich ludicrously called the royal road to the unconscious. And apparently that's not what Reich was doing at all.
No, I mean, I think one of the things, for the small group of people that are here and to the small group of people that will listen to these CDs in general, I think one of the things that happens when you hear Reich is you get a chance, as you do when you read Reich, but I guess in today's world it's easier to hear him than people are more interested in hearing than reading. But when you hear him, you really hear that he doesn't have a very, very fixed agenda as much as a kind of genuinely enthusiastic interest in exploring phenomena and exploring material, and is not interested in pushing a particular case. Is interested in what can really be seen and learned. That would be my sense of what comes. Well, let's listen to some more Reich. Unless Dr. Schiff, you have anything?
No, that's fine.
Are you hearing any of this?
What? I hear some of it.
Okay. All right. We're going again now, the third track.
Only a human being who experienced his mates as close could have found such a method. That means my organism had to be open and direct before that distinguishes me today here. Still, you know that. And that's the greatest thing, that's a great misery. By the way, I have to be personal here now. Because if you are open and straight and transparent, and the other fellow's always shut and hidden and so on, that's a terrific thing. That's horrible.
It's stone wall.
Of course, always again and again. It's like a desert, living in a desert.
You meet it as a resistance all the time.
Of course, not only here in politics and sociology, yeah? The sitting of people, that's already mass psychology, you understand? That goes, we should come back to that. Clear. But now, I see in your questions now that you begin to think systematically. Is that clear? Today, for the first time, I think, I have the feeling that you are logically sticking to a problem. Right? And what you're doing now is develop a method of penetrating the problem then. Yeah?
What is the core?
Core? And what happens here now? Perfect.
Expand.
That's the first thing. That's the first living expression. And here's an obstacle outside. It's not a block, please.
Let me stop there, because that last comment really is the bridge to, now he's going to really be talking about the subject, particularly about the core, the nature of the core, and more energetic functioning, more subject matter. The last comment he made also is another example, I think, often where Reich is misunderstood. What he's saying is that in order to really do science effectively and approach scientifically any phenomena effectively, one has to be open. And that the more open you are, the more you're going to experience and the more you're going to have a chance to find in the situation and in the object that is being addressed. But he says that the problem is that this is a great misery, that this is a terrible thing, because what happens is the more open you are, the more subject you are to misinterpretation, to abuse, and to being more isolated and more out of the professional loop. He often commented in a number of interviews and a number of more less professional writings that if you read him in Reich Speaks on Freud, tapes that were made for the Freud archives, he comments constantly on the fact that openness led to him being isolated more and more within the psychoanalytic community and more and more, in a sense, hurt and subject to lies and misrepresentations along the lines, particularly of Theodor Reich, and but also one of the arch figures behind this was his closest friend in Europe, Otto Fenichel, and then also one of his students, particularly Erich Fromm, who was really a very vicious detractor of Reich's and rumor spreader. Came to this country, established his own position, and then began to spread rumors actively. And this is all documented. The Fenichel stuff is available in the letters that Fenichel distributed among psychoanalysts, and the Fromm stuff is well documented in lectures and other correspondence. But again, and the other figure who became very, very adamant in the attack on Reich and the discrediting of Reich, and then later even supported the FDA, Reich will mention at one point, a little bit towards the end of this, was the Meningers, the Meninger brothers out in St. Louis or Milwaukee. So there is this concept, and Reich is aware of it. What strikes me when he makes that comment is it's not really said with rancor. It's just said with sort of a kind of, well, this is a terrible thing, and it's the price you pay for doing this kind of work, which he evidently did tell a lot of his students, that you don't want to do this if you're looking for good careers and for moving ahead, because they're not going to welcome you with open arms. Okay, so now he's moving on to discussion of the actual object of study, or the nature of how and what happens to energy. And the other thing to keep in mind, which will constantly be referred to throughout these CDs, if you listen to the whole CDs, is Reich is very, very emphatic that he is not lecturing on psychology. And that he is not, while he later has some very interesting things to say about psychology, but psychology is not the subject matter of orgonomy. It's one of the aspects that one could look at and consider. But this is a natural science, as far as Reich is concerned. And for the first time, and a number of people were here for the last lecture on the general presentation on orgonomy. For the first time, last time, I felt that I was able to actually give a lecture that was based on presenting orgonomy as a natural science rather than as a product of psychology or sort of an outgrowth of psychology. So Reich will now talk about the nature of what he calls the core and how you understand what happens when that core is interviewed. What he's really trying to do in this tape, in this part of the CD, is to help the participants understand where armoring comes from. How does one become armored? And we all assume that one becomes armored, in some sort of dramatic process where the organism, becomes rigidified and resists the world. And Reich consistently breaks down that whole idea, and he explains how, and keeps forcing them to look at the process of how the armor emerges naturally from natural reactions of the core of one's bioenergetic self. Do you have any comments, Dr. Schiff, if you still hear us? Hello?
Hello? Yeah, you're breaking up a lot.
Oh, okay.
I can only hear like about 50% of what you said.
Well, that's probably about the right amount.
Oh, no, I think I would have enjoyed the other 50%.
Depends on which 50%. Okay.
Why don't we just go on? Because I'm
okay. Is this better?
What?
You hear me better now?
Yeah. You come in and out in segments.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe it's where you're standing.
Yeah, I'll try to direct my voice to the microphone more directly. Here, we're going back to the tape now.
Got it. Okay.
Section 4. Okay.
An external.
It's the external obstacle. It's very important to distinguish now an obstacle from a block. These are two different things.
Functionally the same.
No, not even functionally the same. How that was it wrong? That was it done. That's that. No, it's only an obstacle. So the next reaction is that. Right? Withdraw. Now, you withdraw, what happens here while that is still active, while the core is still producing energy? More, yeah. That means you have to go up again. You read it again. Right? So, you go back again. Right? Now what begins to happen is that's creation. That's creation of new functions. Very, very beautiful. I love this piece here. Yeah? What is bound to happen now? No, greater. The restlessness is already there. Greater, and you go down again and give it again. Their mother there or father. Huh? Okay? And you have to go back again. Yeah? You want to play, the father says, sit quiet. You want to go there and investigate something as a little child, and the mother comes and says, hits you on the hand. Yeah? And so you move up, and you have to go back and back again. What happens next? Logically, must happen. What's the next?
I'm angry.
Is that clear, Dr. Schiff? Must be. There's no other. That's living functioning. So you have number 1 is pleasure. Yes? Huh? Number 2 reaction is withdrawal or fear. Yes? Yes? When you want to expand and you have to contract, you become restless and fearful. What do I do now? It's wrong. Yes? It's wrong. That is expressed in terms of psychology, but it is not psychological in the beginning. Then, number 3, let's get that damn obstacle out of the way.
Rage.
Right.
Not rage or anger come directly after pleasure without?
No, never. That's a very important point. Doctor, if you say such a thing, I want you to deduce it always. You can't just say something.
Well,
Wait a minute, I'm not through yet. Excuse me, you don't mind it now, and I say it. That's exactly what I don't want. When you say something, then say why you say.
I have a specific example.
You can't have an example for that. That's out of question. How could rage be? Give me an example, let me see whether that's right.
I walk on the road, and I stub my toe against the rock. I bend over with rage, and I pick up the rock, and I throw it.
Then you're already neurotic. Yes. That's already a reaction out of the higher development. Your example doesn't fit. Because an animal that has no armor and hasn't some nagging wife at home or something of the kind will not do that. that clear? What will it do with the meter up? Step over it or around?
How about anticipation of an anxiety?
Wait a minute. What did he do now, Dr. Strauss?
Way ahead.
You jumped. We have a logic, doctor. We are developing a theory. Yes? Is that clear? Is that clear, Dr. Silver? You can jump, but I'm going to kill the cognitive. And I killed it in about 2,000 physicians already, and I'm going to kill it in others. You get it? That kills the word. That's a UN. But they talky, formal things to keep the talky in proper shape. Huh? Talky. And the main issue is not there. By the way, you have it in development in your medical association already. I want to warn you. It's already there. Formalisms and things and that, you understand? And not getting at the problem. Working on something practical.
Well,
Okay, because again, some of you, you seem to be hearing, so I assume, but it might also be good to move closer so you can really pick up some of these comments. You also get a clearer sense of Reich's humor. I mean, he's not often Reich is presented as a sort of relentless, humorless individual, and he's not that at all. But here, the key point here is one of the doctors, and actually I think it's Dr. Raphael, attempts to offer an example of what Reich is basically describing is that, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, that as the individual moves out into the world and encounters a resistance, that's the response to the resistance is not armoring yet. It's simply, I meet a resistance, I pull back, because, and then I strategize. How can I get past that resistance? So he says, you want to play with a toy, and your father says no. You bounce back, you pull back from that, and you try to figure another way to get it. But you keep meeting resistance. Eventually, you begin to become more chronically debilitated in some way, and yet he keeps saying that this is all logical. This is not pathology yet. This is logical. This is reasonable. One encounters things in the world that present blocks. That doesn't mean you're armored. It takes a while to get to a point where armoring will emerge. At which point, one of the doctors, Raphael, I think in this case, says, well, what about the case of someone stubs their toe on a rock and picks the rock up and starts smashing and stamping their feet and Reich's response is, well, that's already a higher form of development. You're neurotic, and the answer is, what would an animal do in encountering a rock in front of them? They would basically step over it or go around it, or if they bumped into it, as my dog occasionally does, basically they just catch their balance and they realize, I better move this way rather than that way. It's not a big issue. My dog doesn't suddenly turn around and growl at the rock and try to, kill the rock, okay? In what always strikes me again in Reich's approach to all of this is that even in these kinds of things, he uses this as a learning, a moment for learning, because already what he's giving us is a clear, real functional explanation of the origin of neurosis, of where neurosis and how neurosis begins to set in and operate. And he keeps admonishing the participants not to jump ahead. And the other thing, which I thought was lovely, is his constant insistence that if you're going to say something, think it out. And be able to follow it out step by step, and don't just jump ahead and try to know something. And then he talks about, you might have missed when he says about the talky, right?
The UN, was he talking about?
Yeah, the UN, which he hated because he felt all these guys were just getting together and chat. Perfect example is this week, they had a big conference at the UN, how to save the lives of children. And the big step was that they finally decided they might ask some children to come and talk, actually, at this conference.
Unbelievable how relevant he was.
Right.
60 years ago to what's happening
Right.
today.
So they brought in some children from around the world who were carefully selected, They basically treated them with very patronizingly, and then announced a program which every child advocate said was basically a bunch of talky rhetoric that did nothing to save the lives of children or to improve the lives of children, and wouldn't address. They refused to talk about anything that had to do with adolescent sexuality or sexual health in children or use of contraceptives, which they didn't want to offend anybody. Except children, but children don't matter. You can offend children. That's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Why don't you talk? We have a comment.
Okay.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
The
very
question
well.
I have is: did he identified 4 steps, 4 stages there? The first
No,
was
I'm losing you here.
Okay.
The first one was the second one was withdrawal. Did I hear that? And were there 4 steps there?
Well, he talks about that. I don't think he specifically formalizes the steps. He says that you have the core and it goes out, and then it encounters. I think he's just talking about number of sequences, and he's saying then it encounters a resistance and it pulls back.
He didn't give a number. He said one.
Yeah. But he was just talking about the first time, the second time, the third time. He wouldn't. I don't think he would say that there's a certain number of times and then you're definitely armored or blocked. I think he's just talking about it as a process in which you keep running up against the block, and eventually something. After a certain number of times, you're going to begin to become more chronically, held. Chronically resistant.
I think it's a very fascinating the way Reich speaks about it, and to me it addresses his really understanding of what I would consider like the force of life. I mean, essentially, you come up with an obstacle, and naturally you withdraw, but then you would try again, and you see that persistently. I mean, in the face of many, many obstacles. For some reason, people, and of course you see it with children, keep emerging and trying to try again. And he's grounding that in this kind of natural energetic phenomena. And in a developmental psych classes, I often show this film, which would be hard to describe, but it's a kind of experiment that they do with infants, where infants are smiling and put in a situation where they're smiling and reaching toward their mother, and then they ask the mothers not to respond, to put a still face on. And you see the infant's reactions in video. You see how the infant's reactions so clearly match what Reich is speaking about. Immediately, the infants droop down, they withdraw. You see a collapsing of their body, an averting of their eyes, a pulling away from mother, but then they attempt to re-engage. And they try different kind of strategies in which to re-engage mother, in the same way that Reich is speaking about, that they come out again. But eventually, if mother is not engaged, they remain in this droop posture, and they become more and more distressed. And from Reich's point of view, this is A, not armoring yet, or B, it's not really psychology.
Right.
It's just the natural energetic functioning, which is so observable first in infants, in children, but can be observable in all of life.
Yeah, Dr. Sobey used to say it's like a flower that happens to open up in a dry, arid environment. It opens up with all the enthusiasm and the expectation of a rich, nutrient environment, and it gets heat and dryness. It persists in trying to survive, but eventually it'll either be stunted or eventually will droop and collapse. If you're going to talk, you're going to...
The analogy that I'm getting is that if a child is with parents that are basically inclined to not stop the child's movement, even though they will occasionally stop the child from sticking his finger into an electric socket or something like that, that doesn't armor the child.
Right.
But the parents whose stop movement, period, that eventually the child will resign and then become blocked and armored and everything else.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the key things, which I think Dr. Schiff is alluding to, and Reich is very insistent on, is that none of this can be assumed to be automatically to result in an individual becoming armored. And that the biggest mistake in often understanding our work and these principles is the assumption that there's a very mechanical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps and you're armored kind of thing. And that what Reich keeps insisting on is that it is a natural process that has to do with the nature of what happens when energy is restricted, and that you cannot successfully understand it if you come up with a mechanical theory. The mechanical theories will always fail in some way because there are always organisms that, resolve it or work it through differently than other organisms. And one of the problems with diagnostic and statistic manuals, or a diagnostic and a statistic approach towards psychology, is that very often you look at situations and a person should add up to a particular diagnosis, and yet they're not that way. So psychology's response is, well, we missed something. What Reich would say is that you're not missing anything, it's just that the individual didn't read the books and didn't know that they're supposed to wind up being a 3.20, 300.20. So that, but that the system, Dr. Lerner here works in a school as a school psychologist doing testing. The problem is if you try to add anything that doesn't fit into what the diagnostic codes are, you're going to get called in and say, you're making problems. We can't process this. You're screwing up the works. And what Reich is saying is, you got to decide what your your primary goals are. Are you there to understand the nature and function of nature and life, or are you there to, facilitate functionary processes of coding and classifying and organizing? And unfortunately, we all know where the latter leads. So I think that's very crucial. Did you get any of that?
I got it all.
Okay, so let's move on. Actually, I realize we might listen to a bit more now rather than comment, because otherwise we'll be here until the cows come home.
I know.
You would like yourself for that. Well, you jumped.
I jumped.
You jumped well, but you jumped in the wrong direction. The situation you are talking about now, the sympathy with an accident is so far removed from what we are talking about. We are in the realm of basic biophysical, bioenergetic function. And the sympathy with as you mean as a doctor in an ambulance or so?
No, the reaction to a sudden emergency. Suddenly, it's a readiness flashing or whatever. But
would that be a clear example? Would it be a clear example? You see, as you choose your examples, I would suggest that you always choose your examples so that it really gives a situation or represents the situation clearest. Huh? Clearest. That would it represent? I don't think so.
I was thinking of hardening of the muscle emergency.
Of course you do. You can find it everywhere. Yes, but the example is not quite clear, is it?
No.
Well, it's not quite clear. You understand? On the contrary, that is a core of autonomic functioning. You can't do anything about it. When the child is confined from outside and begins to confine itself inside too, in addition to that, then it will develop necessarily what? Anxiety. What about the temporal factor? What? The temporal factor. Oh yes. Yeah, you could bring in now, just fine, you could bring in what? A very important disease. The traumatic war neurosis. That's the situation of the traumatic war neurosis.
Shell shock.
Situation there, no doubt about it.
See, I was thinking about the fellow who does go into a Nazi meeting and he does track the. What if he sat there for 2 hours? Would that be time enough to develop anxiety? I'm trying to figure out.
If you couldn't these are specialized questions. We may discuss it. I don't know. But the primary situation that he wants to do something, he goes there. The healthy fellow goes there to want to smash it up. Huh? At the same time, he has to confine himself. But that's too far away. Take the traumatic neurosis much closer. Because in the traumatic war neurosis, you go in fully geared to sadistic action, right? And you're confined. You can't do something. You can't do anything. Then a grenade explodes suddenly. So in this confined situation, what happens here? Pushing. Shock. What you call shock. Right? A shock against what? Against a tremendous expansiveness. Yeah? And that apparently has something to do with this shock reaction as a result of it. Yeah, but we don't want to go into that. That's only an assumption, and you can go on and study it. But it's a logical assumption. But the main thing is what here? Here's the confinement, and here is inner pressure. Now you can speak of, now, first time. What happens here now? Just inner confinement, okay? That's this. That means an energy which wants to move, motility which wants to move is confined and cannot move. Is it clear? Quite clear. That's logically, clearly emerging from our system. It is in accordance with the real facts as they go on, and you can begin to apply it now in phenomena. A child in an anxiety tantrum, an animal, yeah, which gets into a fury, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes he uses the example. Two things. One, Dr. Sobey introduces the idea of what happens to a healthy individual that finds themselves in a repressed and horribly negative situation. Right? So, well, that's a good special case, but it's not really, the key issue.
I'm losing you here.
That he talks about the special case of an organism in a very negative situation, like going to a Nazi meeting. And how 2 hours there would affect it. And Reich says it would affect anybody terribly, but that's really a special case. The same with what they're talking about, and this is interesting historically because this is right after the war. Most of these guys had been psychiatrists in the army. They had been army doctors. So the big thing was what's the nature of what they called in those days war neurosis or shell shock. As opposed to what we would now call post-traumatic stress syndrome. But again, Reich uses that in a wonderful way. He says that what's happening, most people don't get this, is that the organism in war is rationally set for an incredible expansion and push towards sadistic activity. And that's not unhealthy. It's not, we wouldn't say unhealthy. That's not irrational. In other words, if you're going to be in a war situation, you better be ready, you better be focused for a aggressive and essentially outwardly directed aggressive behavior, or what would correctly be sadistic action. And that you're primed for that. So when a grenade goes off or when something goes off, your whole system sort of explodes. And there's levels of anxiety and terror and reaction, all of which are rational in the moment. He's not going to the issue of whether war is rational, whether war is good, whether violence is good, but just to understand what happens to the organism. And some organisms are fragile, so fragile that they can't, cope with that kind of explosive situation. Others, can adjust to it more effectively. But always with Reich, he's less interested in the special cases of what happens here or there than in the general phenomena. So that's what I always find very, very useful in listening to this. Any comments? Did you hear any of that?
Yeah, I heard it all.
Okay. Should we go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
What would the basic difference be between a sadistic action and a genital embrace? Money. Sorry. Yeah? Yeah? That's right. Very good. The functional, speak a bit louder so we can get into the microphone. The basic that you test cases or you judge functions from one single principle only, and that is the energy economy for the organism. Yeah? Is this or that energy activity in accordance with an ordered energy economy of the organism, or is it not? That is not morality, that is a clinical, scientific standpoint, base. Everybody has a base in judgment. The one has a moral one, the other one has a state authority one, and so on and so on. We have also a base of judgment, and that is the action of the individual an orderly, but not orderly in a moral sense, but it is orderly in a bioenergetic sense. It means, does it keep the metabolism of the organism going or not? Like this. Now, Dr. Henneman said that the secondary drives are distorted primary drives. Now, how does this distortion come about? Let's discuss that. Who would like to, I know you would like me to speak, go on top.
Yeah, that he would all like him to tell me.
Now, I want you to try this. What do you think?
Well, we
Take the scheme now.
Yeah.
Just orientate yourself with the scheme.
given a healthy pulsating organism where expansion is blocked outwardly.
Would you say expansion is blocked? What is blocked? What do you know about block?
Well, we spoke of an outside block.
Outside block.
Which impedes or stops the expansion in the organism, the biological expansion.
Or sexual function. Yes.
The result is a increase in activity in the organism as it tries to expand against the block. But finally, the expansion stops, and although there's an increase of energy, the periphery contracts against the energy.
Next consequence is what? Inevitably.
Well, this is armor.
No, that's not armor yet. That's the point. That's the point. No, that's not block yet either. That's anxiety.
Yeah.
Please keep that very well. If you will see later as we go through case, there's no exception to that. Whenever an impulse to expand meets a block and it has to reverse, to retire into itself, against an expansion, I say, against an expansion, then there's a restlessness. The least is restlessness. And restlessness can grow into severe anxiety. And now what is the next consequence? Is that returns. That means you have to withdraw into yourself. You can't just do what you want.
Well, the inner stasis, let me say it this way, the organism attempts to relieve the inner stasis. It tries to establish a better bioenergetic economy by somehow trying to release this.
That's right.
And if it cannot release it from the core, it can only be released partially, or in ways which are not a total expression of its biological core.
That's right. And what will inevitably happen then? Then it cannot come through. It cannot satisfy its basic needs.
Well,
no armor yet. No armor yet.
The energy will build up because of stasis, and then it will try to push out.
Exactly. It will start pushing, and that pushing is called in psychology. We call what? Destruction. Exactly. So the quality which bioenergetically is a pushing, yes, a getting, a pushing, a hitting through, is psychologically described as destructive. Now, this destructive is brought to, exactly, outside. You assume that any expression of the living organism is blocked, and it has to return again. It has to return again. And that oscillates that way. Between what? Now, in the core there is very high tension, right? Very high potential, you can call it. And outside is a block, so it oscillates to and fro all the time, right? Now, is that such a state of affairs? Is that bearable to the organism? A constant oscillation, constant out and in, is that clear? It is not bearable. So what must happen now?
Find some way to hold it inside.
If you speak too psychologically, it's correct what you are saying, but it is expressed in two psychological terms. It's much more bioenergetic, the whole thing.
Equilibrium.
What? That's right. Stop the motion, because this motion became very unpleasant. Right? Imagine an animal, that's frustration. That's the meaning of frustration. In an animal, you have a piece of meat there, it wants to eat, it's hungry, that's wants to eat. The wants to eat, well, can't get it. If you have that picture clearly in your mind, then you have the whole situation.
Yeah, you notice, it just strikes me, again, as so classic the way Reich works, is that all of that, one could go into highly technical, very, very elaborate discussions, right, whole text, and what it comes down to is Reich is describing what the nature of the human experience of frustration is. He's just given a absolutely stupendously, particular and exact empirical description of what frustration is in real human terms. And in my sense, that's science. It's also great poetry. It's also great music. I mean, if you can do that, that's what it's about. That's what he'll later talk about creativity, what the creative process is. That's what it's about. It's not about a lot of detailed descriptions of everyone might want to go to, what is the nature of tension? How does it work here? What is it? And for Reich, it's always, what is the functional reality of this? The reality of this comes down to it's explaining what a dog experiences when there's a piece of meat and it can't reach it, or it's prevented from reaching it. In one sense, also what gets Reich into great trouble is that scientists don't want to hear that. They want to hear real heavy, duty technical science with a lot of gadgets. I knew a guy once who said the problem with Reich was he would have had no trouble if he had built his accumulators, his doorbusters with a lot more gadgets and gauges and buttons that nobody understood. Then everybody would have accepted it, and that's exactly, and you hear in Reich's own words, why he couldn't be interested in that. It was much more interesting to him in much the same way that a young child would be interested in a little boy that just left, was wanting to know why we walked past a hole in the wall out in the building. He was saying, they're going to do some serious work here. Right, and he said, I wonder what kind of work. That's the kind of question that Reich would say is a natural scientific question. Did you get any of that?
Yeah, I did. I have a few comments.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, one comment is that if anyone does have an opportunity to get these CDs,
right.
I hope you do, because it really is so valuable to listen again and again and again. I've heard this little segment about 10 times now, and it's been very valuable to me to hear it again and again and again. So that's one suggestion. The other is really to feel the aliveness of this phenomenon. It makes me think, it goes back to Freud's early work, when Freud was talking about the senses and the internal instincts and the way there was repression and then pressure and all these kind of very lively phenomena that Reich then is able to concretize and be able to understand as a biological phenomena, which Freud was struggling with. It really depicts and then can really reach what the experience is, the human experience or the experience of life is. And it's not an abstraction. So much today when we talk about, in psychology, affect and feeling and how affect is kind of repressed, it's all based on more computer models. It's more based in terms of splitting and schema and cognitive defenses. And what it lacks and what misses is this very vital aspect of really how it really is experienced and how alive and how there's all this pressure and holding back and building up of charge and then preventing that charge to come out. And Reich himself, in speaking about this, is so lively himself. And in his liveliness, I think to me, he conveys the actual process that he is describing.
Right.
So I'm very struck by. I love this segment, and I'm ready to listen to it to another 10 times.
Right. No, it's really amazing. I mean, this is the way he works, and again, it's really about the connection with the process. And classic is the issue of frustration is that in traditional clinical psychology, a patient talks about frustration, or in psychoanalysis, we're immediately ready to interpret what frustration means. One of the things that always struck me in orgonomy is when someone says they're frustrated, the question is, okay, it's a real experience. How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to understand it? What is its impact on the organism? How are we going to work through it? What is it connected to? That's a very, very different approach than an abstract understanding of what the significance and meaning of frustration is, which Reich completely takes away. He takes the doctors who begin to start psychologizing about it. Well, it's this kind of resistance or that kind of resistance, and he says, no, it's frustration. I often liken my love of Mel Brooks to my initial interest in Reich. I mean, it's a very similar kind of direct, response to the world.
Scatological.
Not scatological, direct. Dr. Schiff is not big into humor. Dr. Rothenberg and Dr. Sobey and I used to enjoy, would have understood the Mel Brooks presence in Reich's approach. Anyway, but any other comments or any questions here? Are we getting? Are we finally being? Most of you can now, as you moved in, can hear most of this. Okay, and the jackhammers. The jackhammers in the back are construction in Soho. Tribeca, sorry, Tribeca. Okay, yeah.
Sensitivity is a function of motility. The more mobile you are, the more sensitive you are. The more you experience, right?
Sensitivity.
The more that gets into you. In very popular terms. Now that was that now. That means the energy has been caught. The energy function has been caught where? Where? No, make up your mind. Where? You don't do the arm. No, that was wrong. That was a dud this time. The arm is a consequence. It's not there yet. Yeah? What? No, that was a dud again. Now where is the energy caught?
It's caught under the stiff muscle.
No, right under.
At the stiff muscle. In the stiff muscle.
In the muscle activity.
But can't you still have energy movement under the?
Of course you have.
Between the core.
Of course you have. But the energy which does not penetrate through to the surface, right? Is caught where?
The muscle, right there.
In the second point. Yeah. The muscle. This energy is now used to do what?
Fighting against itself.
Not to fight, that's psychology.
Muscle contraction.
Keep the muscle contracted, that was the answer. Right? Watch out what you're saying, in psychological terms or in physical terms. There is no psychology yet in a child of 2 weeks, please. You kind of keep that very well in mind. If you made a mistake, then you must know which mistake you made. That's very important. It doesn't put you down, it puts you up. That's, again, a human characteristic. As usually people are afraid of making a mistake and saying, I made a mistake. Huh? I said it before, right? Before that. No, it puts you out. So don't pass by that mistake. It's very important. So what's the difference between get to the secondary drives? What are secondary drives again? Let's define it again. Distorted primary drives. And distorted in the arm. What?
And the result.
What?
The resultants.
The resultants of the armor being interpolated between expression of the organism, and source. I have the feeling that's hard stuff for you. What? It is? Listen, gentlemen, that's where we live. That's our work of thought. That's the way we work with things. If you don't know these things, how can you replace the distorted manifestation in the patient by the natural one? When the infant is born, what is its organismic status? What's the state of the organism?
Well, it's very diffused.
Would you call it diffused? I know what you mean. Yeah?
It's not integrated.
It's not integrated.
There's no exterior.
Oh yes, that wasn't done. No. The experiences are very rich. We may assume that the experiences in a newborn infant are much stronger, relative.
You could compare it to a bunch of amoeba that in a field.
Yeah.
Each has its own life.
Yeah.
That does not make contact
With the other. That's a hookup.
Yeah.
That means the child comes to the world unintegrated. Not disintegrated, because it never was integrated yet. Right? But unintegrated. And how does that show? How do we know that? By direct observation.
Well, it puts an arm out here and a leg there.
That's right. That means that different organs and movements show no purpose, no meaning. Here we get in something new again. What do we get in here? Why did I say purpose and meaning now? If you look at a newborn baby, the movements are without meaning, without purpose. They give the impression of meaninglessness, yes? Purposelessness, exactly as in the schizophrenic and catatonic. Is that clear? Now we would not say now, as analysts say, that the schizophrenic or catatonic regresses to this phase. We think differently. I wouldn't like to discuss now whether they are right or wrong. But what is clear is that they are similar or even identical situations in the catatonic, especially mannerisms, and in the infant. And the common thing is that both lack meaningfulness and purposefulness. They're clear. The infant and the schizophrenic and catatonic especially. Good. And we say now, the child is not integrated yet.
That was Dr. Willie who was talking.
We should learn something about the infant, what it means to integrate. To become a whole, one functioning whole. The infant is not a functioning whole. It's a sum of parts. And each part works in its own functions in its own direction. The hand here, and the legs there, and the stomach for itself. Yeah? The brain doesn't function very well at all yet, especially the gray substance. And the eyes. Now let's bring in the eyes now, which plays such a great role in the later schizophrenic. Now, how is the eye situation in a newborn infant? And that's very important, because if we go ahead with our program, with the Preventive Service Center, then these things will play a central role in teaching of mothers and nurses and social workers to understand what goes on in a child which is newborn, just comes to the world, during the first 2 months. That's about the time where the integration of the total organism runs its course. 2-3 months maybe. Our premise is clear. Any questions, please? Are there any questions? Nothing? There must be some. Now what do we mean when we say, let's go to the baby now. Integration, what is that? Integration, give a very clear example of the process of integration in a newborn infant. What? Try to find your examples well. Pick your examples so that they really illuminate a theoretical position.
The process through which the infant begins to function as a unit, as a unitary whole.
Yes. Give me a concrete example. Yes, you just formulated very well the end results. Yes, of the integration. Of the process of integration. But I want you to be clinical now. Now what do you see? Look, observe the infant and give me,
as the process of integration is going on, the infant will one day put its hand out and look at it, and realize that that's part of it.
That's
then another part of the body.
That's
the foot.
Give another practical example. Yes, what will it do with the foot? What could it do if you don't
put it in its mouth, feel it, touch it?
That's right. To begin with, the organs move senselessly around. Right? The mouth moves here, and the foot moves there, and the hand moves here, and the eyes move somewhere else. And even the eyes are not coordinated; they don't focus. You know that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now then, one day, these different functions, which are single functions, which are total, they are total too, these functions, of course, but they are total only with respect to what? The hand motion, for instance. Of course, the total hand moves, but it's total only with respect to the hand, to the arm, to the organ. Yeah. Just as the stomach moves, as a stomach, right? Each eye moves, each eye moves for itself as a total organ. But what is not there? The synchronization. Yeah? And go to Dr.
Should we not begin with the energy function first?
That is energy function, Doctor. What do you mean when you say should we not begin with the energy function?
I mean, first, you see, let's say there's in an eye or in a mouth, let's say,
Yes.
there is a reaching out, a feel reaching out there. There's an excitation in a definite organ.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's right. You are quite correct. You see, if we consider the depth of the different phases of development there, then we must say that before such an integration after birth takes place, something else goes on in the uterus already. And that is the energy functions, the organ energy functions in the organism, which form the embryo. You understand? What takes place first is an integration of what? Integration of what? In the uterus, prenatally.
An integration of growth.
Yes, he's quite right. Integration of growth, an integration of somatic organs. Yeah? That means a child couldn't live if the different organs wouldn't be integrated into each other. Now what is the difference between this integration now, before birth, and the integration we just talked about after birth, soon after birth?
One is I would say, a growth integration.
Right? Why do you say growth? May I interrupt you, please? It's integration which comes formation of the symmetric growth of the body. That's right. That's the point. The symmetric growth. If it were not integrated to begin with in the uterus, what would happen?
That sometimes happens with malformations.
Exactly. What?
Or death.
Death or something else. Malformations. Malformations. Yes.
Malformation.
So that has taken place before. We are not speaking about this type of integration. But we have to distinguish different kinds of integrations in the growth of the baby. One is integration of growth, we can call it that way, until the organism is formed, so it's not quite completed. Because, for instance, the upper part of the organism is much larger in the newborn baby still than the lower part of the organism. But what we are talking about in connection with schizophrenia and the first disturbances of oral orgasm and the disposition for later schizophrenic breakdown has nothing whatsoever to do with the process of growth, with the coordination of growth. But what has it to do? How would we call it now? What kind? It has to do with coordination, with the process of coordination. But what kind of? What would we call it? What does coordinate there? Growth, or growth goes on, of course. Right? Growth goes on, the process of growth. But it is coordinated already. The organism is on its way. What is not coordinated?
I would say sensory functioning.
That's right. Sensory functioning. That's right. Or I would say it more completely. Sensomotor functioning. Sensomotor functioning is not integrated. That means the organism as a physical unit is much farther ahead on its way than the sensomotor and perceptory, I would add to that. Sensory means the same. It's not quite the same. But that cleared up quite a lot of it. What? That means that an organism consists or has as constituents growth, metabolism, energy, blood metabolism, food metabolism, and so on. That's one thing. And the other thing is something quite different, and a quite different quality, and that is, on a higher level, the function of, what would you call it now? We call it sensory motor, but it's, where does that lead? Where does it go on? You see, the growth function stops at about 18 or 20. What is the other? Where does the other go? Where does it lead to?
It's out in the world.
Exactly. The other function goes into the relationship of the organism with the world, into the social field or biosocial field. Is that quite essential? I have the feeling we are touching here now upon a quite crucial thing. These functions, why should that not be developed? We don't want to go into that. The main problem is now what happens when a child fixes its eyes for the first time on its own finger. What happened there? Now let's analyze that. That's very important. What happened? First the two eyes got it.
and vision, yes?
But I feel that I can answer the question between what happens when the child begins to see its finger, but I'm confused about what happens when the two eyes begin to function together. I feel that here, with the eyes able to function, there's been contact between.
That's the answer. Perfect. There was contact. Please keep that in that word. That's very good. Contact. Why? Why is that word so important? Is there a connection here?
Because it's the basis of all functioning, all unitary functioning.
Of all later contact functioning. The schizophrenic disease is characterized by lack of contact, by split contact, by withdrawal from contact, and so on. So these first contacts between a function in the organism, the eyes, and say the wall, newborn babies like red, for instance. I saw that. I don't know whether old children or newborn, but that is true. Or between the eyes and the moving finger. Now what made contact now? What made contact?
Two fields.
Two energy fields. Two energy fields. That's right. Two energy fields made contact. We can also express it in a different way, which means the same, of course, and that is two motions, two movements made contact. Two movements made contact. That move, this move. And then they met. And from now on, that will be the prototype of every later coming contact between eyes and motions. So when the child is a unity in its energy as a system, yet that splits up into different functions. Now these functions meet up there. The eye and the hand movement. And they make contact. Now I would suggest very much to keep the word contact very clearly in mind. The word contact, just this word. Making contact. Now what goes on? Now these two make contact. We see it, we can observe that. What happened to the child in that process? The child took a step. That's clear. Step toward what? In what? What happened in the child? To the totality now. You get my point now?
I'm running ahead to the end.
Yes, we are beginning to construct the end now. Is that clear? Now what happened to the child? We know now what happened between the two movements. They made contact. Now while these two movements, which are part of the whole, made contact, what happened to the whole?
It became an integral part of the whole.
It became an integral part, quite perfect. Now it became an integral part of the whole. It means from now on, the eyes will follow every movement. That means a new function was born. Is that right? A new function. Through this contact between an eye movement and a hand movement, a new function was born. Namely, the function of, from now on, fixing eyes on everything. See. The function of seeing. But we still didn't answer quite what happened to the total. Not quite. You answered a part of it. A new function was born in the whole organism. Now the whole organism consists of organic and of a psychic function, basically.
Well, you'd have to differentiate some of that totality.
That's right. Very good, Dr. Willie. That's right on the track now. Now what? Yes. How? Go ahead. What is where the brain comes in? There's somewhere where the brain comes in. We are still far from the brain. But there's something much closer there. From now on, seeing is set in. Seeing is a physiological, biological, biophysical function, right? But something happened to that ego of that child.
The perception.
Yes?
And the somatic
That's right. Make contact. That's right. Here, for the first time, an excitation or a movement, a field action, made contact with a perception. Perception of what now?
The perception of what the chance, of the excitation of the eye.
No? Oh, that too, of course. concept. Yeah. No. Now we said contacts. The more contacts there are between movements among each other and perception of movement within movements, the clearer becomes consciousness. Or consciousness is the same as in the form of self-awareness. If there's any doubt, please, or any lack of logical sequence, then please say so. We'll make a pause now. If you have anything to say, just say now. That means the great problem of how consciousness comes about can most probably be solved by a careful study of the process of integration of the newborn baby. Consciousness would appear then as a sum total of all integrations, of all contacts within the organism and of the integrated organism within with the separated world outside. That's clear, right? We are integrating two things which apparently have nothing to do with each other. Well, that is scientific knowledge, or gaining scientific knowledge. If you study or do searching, research, what do? You integrate and unite different facts into an understandable unit. You do the same thing what your organism did when you were born, with your organs, or with your perception. I think that is perfectly clear, isn't it? It's only a continuation of that. Now, the better integrated an organism is, the better it will function as an integrating organism. Into an understandable unit. You do the same thing what your organism did when you were born, with your organs, or with your perception. I think that is perfectly clear, isn't it? It's only a continuation of that. Now, the better integrated an organism is, the better it will function as an integrating organism.
I think a couple of things. One is it's always fascinating to me as I listen to this that a couple of comments. Are you with us?
I am here.
Okay. One is, as I said in my opening remarks, that these comments that Reich is making, which are in the context of the subject for that seminar was the origin of schizophrenia, but it winds up being predominantly about really child development, which he so perceptively understands is the key to understanding this, the eventual schizophrenic predicament or development. What is historically astounding as I listen to this, since I do a lot of work and have been involved a lot with the work of Bowlby and child development research in the 50s and into the 60s, is that this is a good, depending on where you date it, a good 8 to 10 years before any of the major child development research, even attachment research of Bowlby begins to break. Bowlby doesn't really begin to fully formulate his overall model, Bowlby and Ainsworth, until about 1955-56. Reich is already not only talking about this stuff, but he already understands the basic principles. He has some things, some of the research that is subsequent to this will demonstrate that there might be some subtle differences, that some of these so-called purposeless movements might be a little bit more organized than Reich was, ready to understand. Although I'm not sure he didn't understand it, in principle. But it's astounding how at this point nobody, literally nobody, in the field of human development, of child development, was talking in these terms with this kind of accuracy. For instance, just on the subject of the ocular function, of how the eyes work, nobody had even, Robert Fantz, who did the major breakthrough work, and Bauer, were just doing their research at this time. They had not yet even published it. It had not yet come to a fully realized database on this. So that's one just really incredible piece of historical science. The other thing is that as he goes through this whole process, you notice the last comment where I stopped it was he comes back to the final sort of thing, going back to the first thing, that this is doing science. Once you get integrated and you make these kinds of intense contacts, that's where you take pieces and put them together. He's talking about the child doing this. He then jumps to the point is that, and that's what we do when we do science. If you do science correctly and you look at this piece and look at that piece and integrate them and pull them together and make contact with what you're looking at, you've done science and you've had this kind of contactful experience, which is what's so exciting. I think that's what Dr. Schiff is talking about, which is the enthusiasm. As Reich says, he really enjoys doing it, you know.
Art, everything.
Art, right, no, I mean, he will later actually comment, I'm hoping, we probably should be able to finish this, on how this is the whole creative process in general. Any comments, Dr. Schiff?
Well, first, I second what you're saying. I mean, that's my reading as well in terms of the development, in terms of our understanding of early infant development, and the historical, putting that within a historical context. It's really amazing how much Reich was aware of these processes, which, again, as Dr. Lewis is saying, has not been published or researched at least 8 to 10 years. And it is so right on the mark, and yet so alive. That's the other thing to keep coming back to, at least I keep perseverating on that. The aliveness in which he understands this process, in which he engages it. 2 points to really make is, again, the 2 terms that he is emphasizing. 1, integration, and 2nd, contact. And those are such vital points in this whole process. And when I think of the whole process of doing orgone therapy, essentially what you're doing is you're promoting integration. You're trying to integrate disparate elements. Eyes that look sad and a jaw that is angry. And it's not a coordinated piece. You have ambivalence, you have a breakup, a discontinuity between these separate parts of the organism. Eventually you want a fully, as much as you can, an integrated organismic response, which in the end goal would be the orgasm reflex, and then the ability to carry that reflex into one's life.
And make contact.
This whole process of restoring integration becomes the process of orgone therapy. And then how all of the whole nature of resolving disturbances in contact, and how contact is this is the relationship between movement and perception of movement. It's so rich. It's just so rich.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to wait 1 second?
Okay. We're having a technical. I was delighted to see that Reich at one point, going back in time, told one of the doctors, talk more into the microphone. So they obviously had their technological.
The centrality of the octave segment, which is was interesting here.
Right.
How many people were at this seminar?
Probably about 12. Could be 14, but there were at least I can identify about 10 people that I know were pretty clearly there, and it might have varied depending on which. These are different seminars over. These are 6 individual sessions, so it could vary. One of the figures you hear a lot talking, the guy with the Texas accent, was Dr. Willie, who was very interesting historically that a number of these people were very prominent and some semi-retired physicians who came to study Reich. They weren't young guys. Dr. Sobey and Handelman and a few of the others were younger. Dr. Willie was a very, very prominent, successful cardiologist in Texas who had retired and had a lot of money and moved up to New York area to study with Reich because he liked the work. And so this was interesting. And the Tropps, Simeon and Oscar Tropp, were both very successful internists. They weren't psychiatrists. And many of these guys were not psychiatrists. Baker and Wolf and Raphael, and then the younger guys like Handelman, Sobey, Levy, and Dr. Cott, Silvet, were psychiatrists, but many of them weren't. You had a comment? Go ahead.
Just regarding this issue of integration and sensory motor functioning as it relates to school population, particularly the challenge or observations I've made with working with children who are mentally retarded and might have cerebral palsy. One of the frustrations is that a lot of these children spend a great deal of time of their day in wheelchairs. And the wheelchair is meant to allow the child to be mobile throughout the hallway and throughout the school, but it limits the child's interaction socially, cognitively in the classroom. That is, it really cuts off the child from naturally exploring their environment. One of the issues that happens is that instructional experience is based with the child in their wheelchair, where they actually are not able to fully, in a sense, use their motility in interacting with the instruction. And what ends up happening a lot is children like this become very self-stimulatory, and other symptoms develop as a result of their being in a...
They collapse into themselves.
They collapse into themselves, and it's sort of just, I think that's a graphic example of the difficulty of being armored, and also he speaks about the contraction into the muscles, which is another...
Well, except these individuals, particularly, these are malformations. This would not be, and this is very important, these would not be armored individuals. These individuals in which the integration has failed in some way. Why it's failed, how it's failed, is beyond the scope of what we would talk about now. But this is a very good example. It would be mistaken to assume that these individuals are armored. And in fact, one of the most interesting things about working with a retarded often, or with severely handicapped individuals, is often they're not very armored, although their functions are often quite limited. In many respects, particularly in certain of the physiological and cerebral effects, but whether this is actual armoring is much more interesting. Let's go on with this so we can let's hopefully listen to most of it before Dr. Schiff has to depart.
See, what did you do now biophysically or bioenergetically? What happened to you now? What happens to me now all the time when I talk? The contact of 2 or 3 functions, the hookup, the integration of 2 or 3 functions into a whole, into a unit, creates something new. Isn't it? Just as it goes on in growth, and just as it goes on in integrated functioning in early childhood. And that's creation. That's creation. The creative mind works that way. By lucidity. What is lucidity? Lucidity is oneness or complete integration of different functions. The more functions you integrate, the more functions you have in one piece together, hooked up with the common functioning principle, as we call it. Right? The more complete is your understanding. It means knowledge, understanding, and so on, depend on these functions. I'm always very much worried about the younger physicians, They think that the patient moves and shouts and screams and hits, that something happens. No. That's not the therapy. The therapy means the establishing of the totality. And there. Shortly the whole person will show up with that head face. Nothing can be held back. The last seeker, if he cheated you, for instance, all through the therapy, bound to come there, because the orgastic function somehow is connected with a very important ability of the living. Let's be honest. Some of the Jesus-like qualities in there. I mean it very seriously, that thing. It's this certain type of, you can't lie in there. You can't lie, can't cheat anymore. As long as you cheat and lie, you can't get through. And that is the relationship of the physician to the patient, and the patient to the physician, especially in the cases of opposite sex. Would you like to discuss that, or would you like to rather to discuss problems of the accumulator? Well, which? Both. Both. What first? What you would sexual? Yes, I think so. Yes. Now you are all well aware of the fact that this problem turned up as a transference problem and counter-transference problem already in early psychoanalysis. It's quite obvious and clear why. If 2 people in any situation whatsoever, whatever, would be as close personally for such a long time as a physician is in psychiatry with his patient, then a personal relationship has to develop, must develop. And that is not necessarily always transference. Yeah? On the contrary, we would say that is basic human relationship. And without such a basic human relationship, there would be no success. Now, on this basis of the physiological, as we may call it, human relationship, there grow different peculiar growths. One is what psychoanalysis called transference. There was a great outcry in the world, and that outcry was heard all over the world, not only in Europe but in America and so on. And that was that Wilhelm Reich is provoking tremendous transferences and is not dissolving them. Even now, about a month ago, 4 articles appeared in the government newspaper in Scandinavia, where Philipson, one of my students of 10 years ago, told the public what I'm doing very extensively, very well, but still kept up this reproach. I'm provoking transferences, I don't dissolve. Now that problem was early in my mind, and I tried hard to solve it. Now the first thing I want you to know is that what we called before the personal relationship between the physician and the patient is especially pronounced in my case. I don't know whether you observed that already, but I have tremendous influence on people. The influence is so great that I had to develop another attitude, and that is to counteracting it by holding myself in the background. You understand? You may have been astonished that I do not appear anywhere. Yeah? I don't have any personal social intercourse. I had to cut out most of the friendships. Yes, I had. It was a very tragic situation, and still is, because I am basically very, very socially minded. I like gatherings, I like to talk, and I like to listen to people. But I have to cut it all off. It is important, it's essential that I tell you a bit about this background of mine. Until about 1938, till the great crash in Norway, I used to go everywhere. I was in every gathering that was accessible. And usually it happened not usually, always, the people gathered around me, and I was the center. In the beginning, to begin with, I enjoyed that. But then I learned that that's not quite sane, not quite healthy. Not only I personally, but also the subject which I represented was involved. And that was, it can be described or briefly represented as a mystical expectation at salvation. When I appear somewhere or anywhere, everything will be all right. I didn't know that until about 1938. I want you,
Now, what was that last part? What? Life would be all right under what conditions?
If only life would be there and take over. You have it still here around among us. You know,
it's the Christ problem.
Of course the Christ problem. That's the whole Christ problem. This is so essential and crucial that a whole book should be written about it.
This is the origin of murder of Christ.
But as you go on toward the pelvis, and as the pelvic harmonic breaks down, natural genital strivings are emerging. Natural, I say. Natural. These real ones, which have nothing whatsoever to do with childish, with infantile history, yeah? Or with neurotic mechanisms. On the contrary, the appearance of these genital impulses, the natural ones, the healthy ones, is an indication that the neurotic, the sick attitudes have vanished or are in the process of vanishing. That's perfectly clear, right? How do you feel, how do you recognize the emergence of a healthy genital attachment to a duty. Dr. Cott?
Frequently, the therapist himself begins to feel it.
They're very good, excellent, Dr. Cott. I'm very glad you said it. You will see from now on, in the next half hour, that we shall be quite outside the range of present-day thinking, of present-day kind of living. If we follow the lead which goes through our cases, our work, the first sign is that you feel something in yourself that you didn't feel before. When the true natural forces are breaking out in the patient. Now you feel it in yourself, Dr. Cott said, and that's very true. It happens again and again. And what do you think? Is it natural or unnatural? Should it be or shouldn't it be? Of course it should be. If it isn't there, the therapist is sick. Well, that would sound peculiar to the eyes of Mr. Menninger of Topeka. And I want to have it right here on record that I said that, you see? It would sound very peculiar to Gordon, right? But that is the truth. And it's quite obvious it is that way, and it should be that way. That means a healthy organism feels another organism approaching health or in health when it's in excitation. There's nothing more to be said about that.
It's a biological fact.
It's a biological fact. It's a bioenergetic fact. That is up to that means that here I say, keep contact with classical medicine. Very important. But keep contact in the right way, not in the wrong way. Don't give away our science. Don't yield to them to their thing. Keep your knowledge separate and be in contact with that wherever we can do a thing, yes, or we don't know, just do what is known. Do you agree with me on that, Paul?
Yes.
I think that is very essential. But please distinguish this attitude from the attitude of selling out agronomy. Don't sell out agronomic medicine. It is April 3rd.
Okay. That's essentially the last tape, and I think Dr. Schiff will probably be ready to leave. The last piece that we'll listen to is separate from the CDs. It's it's been called Alone, which is which is just Reich's being alone after not one of these seminars, after a meeting at the point in 51, he dates it, when the beginning of the end has set in. It's the beginning of the first attacks. It's probably after the problems of the Ornor experiment and other things, but the attacks on him were beginning, and they're beginning to have meetings. He's had a number of meetings to discuss strategies for dealing with the oncoming attacks, and he clearly is in a state of despair and realizes what's coming. At these meetings, we know that he told participants that it was time for them to get out if they weren't prepared to deal with the coming disaster. He knew that it was going to basically, he had been through a number of these things already in Europe, attacks in Europe, and he knew what was coming. And he offered many for the younger people to leave with all on good terms, because he knew that they were younger and didn't want them to destroy their lives and careers. Actually, one of them who he adored, from all accounts, was Dr. Nathan Cott, who literally came to him and said, "Look, I have a wife, a growing family. I just not prepared to take this on." And Reich, with very, very good feeling, said, "You're absolutely right, and you should do that." And Cott left. And Cott, to this day, has always remained very, very positive about Reich's work and his experiences with Reich. But and as Reich always said, he never had anything bad to say about someone who acted honestly, as long as they didn't misrepresent or try to cover up their own actions by blaming him. But so, without going on to that part, just to quickly end on this, the last comments you heard were some of the more radical. There's a whole tape on that about the interpersonal relationship between patient and therapist in orgonomy. And Reich's position is very clear that it is absolutely essential that the therapist be in touch with their own genuine feeling, and that when another organism becomes alive, that you're going to feel it by it stimulating your organism. So that if you're in contact with that organism, you're going to feel stimulation. That doesn't mean the attack often was these kinds of statements often led to misleading, sort of neurotic and plague, what we would call plague reactions. You see, Reich is talking about that patients and therapists should have sex. He's not saying that. What he's saying is that it is natural to have feeling. It is possible, and in many cases it did happen, right, for Reich himself, that the therapist says, look, I really do have a feeling for you, and I think it's quite genuine. You have a feeling for me. Let's stop being therapist and patient and give it a reasonable time frame, and then see if those feelings are genuine and follow them out. Of course, that would be considered very risque and questionable to even say that. As Reich pointed out, he was making these statements at the time when traditional therapists were being very, very moralistic and having sex with their patients in private and hiding it and doing it neurotically. So what he's talking about is really less the issue of the sexual interaction between doctor and patient than the realization of genuine feeling between doctor and patient. And while it emphasizes on the genital sexual aspects, it would also be true between non-sexual attraction. It would be the beginning of two patients having a patient and a therapist having a genuine contact emotionally and intellectually and pursuing a friendship. Often, friendships emerge between patients and therapists, and then, of course, therapy to some extent has to stop because it's no longer, the therapist becomes incapable of being, as objective. Although ideally in true friendships and true love relationships, hello?
Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah. True love relationships should have that kind of objectivity too, but we'll pass on whether that's realistically possible in this world. But to the extent that it is, I think that's what he's addressing. And I think it's really quite exceptional and quite brave, and often led to great misunderstanding. And he talks there about Menninger would be offended by this, and quite frankly, Menninger was, and they wrote about Reich, and that was the beginning of the attacks, really grew out of that kind of frankness. Many around Reich often argued that it was best to not talk about such things. And that, interestingly, on my last note, and that goes back to the first comment by the inner circle around Freud when Reich gave his first lecture, invited lecture back in 1920, as a young analyst, rising young analyst. The response was a wonderful lecture, Dr. Reich, but did you have to use the word sexuality so much? This was coming from Freud and his inner circle. They felt uncomfortable with his, and this is fascinating that this becomes an ongoing thing, that kind of frankness.
That's what he said, would you rather talk about the accumulator?
Right, but he laughs, and they all say, oh, both, but he knows what they want to talk about, and so he goes. So, do you have any comments before you get off into your day?
Yeah, let me jump in just for a moment, and then also let me say how enjoyable this has been for me, and I look forward to joining you all again. I think, again, for me, what stands out is so much of what Reich is addressing predates what has become a little more accepted, but only a little more accepted in common psychological and psychotherapeutic practice. The understanding of the real relationship. The interpersonal approaches that are being developed in psychoanalytic technique, the tuning into one's emotional responses, unfortunately, as a way of understanding where the other person is coming from and what might be not expressed within the other person. These are all, which seems to be kind of aspects of what Reich is addressing, but I think, as Dr. Luce is saying, doesn't really get to some of the real core issues, especially the issues around sexual excitation and attraction and those things that might emerge. And the other thing I was thinking is that, again, we see so much in terms of the way society has tried to control it in terms of the ethical kind of laws now that that, from Reich's perspective, really goes against what is natural functioning and kind of puts the therapist-client relationship somewhere in this kind of unnatural setting, and then takes the realness out of it.
And mystifies it.
Yeah, mystifies it.
And glorifies, and makes it artificial.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. And also, again, what more than even the sensational aspect is, it always really emphasizes, again, the uniqueness of Reich's approach, which is that he cuts right to the heart of it. It's about, let's not call it, transference is that's how we live in the world. We all transfer, from one experience to another. And let's get to the reality of it. It's about contact. It's about real feeling. And to assume that a therapist sits in a room with a patient for days, months, years, and feels nothing and goes on nothing and has their life, and their life is somehow separate from the life of the patient, is an absurdity. It's a travesty. It's a lie on some level. And what Reich is saying is that if you're going to subscribe to that kind of lie and then go into the room and try to do treatment that is supposed to integrate and help a patient become real, then in a sense you're doing the same thing that probably was done to them as they grew up.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good day.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. We're about ready. Let's let Reich have the last word. And really, I don't know that there's much comment. This last section is quite sad. It's quite poignant, and yet quite, I think, again, typical of Reich's just absolute frankness and directness, which probably was the source of his greatest misery and his downfall. But for better or worse, this is Reich alone at Organon.
1952.
Okay.
It is April 3rd, 1952, at Organon, Rangeley, Maine. I, Wilhelm Reich, am sitting alone in the large room in the lower house. All people are gone. In the morning and the whole day yesterday, a meeting took place of the members of the board of trustees of the foundation which carries my name. Everybody's gone now. I would like to add a few words to the recording we made yesterday and today of the disaster which struck Organon. There's nobody here to listen to what I'm saying. The recording apparatus is the only witness. I hope that someone will at some time in the future listen to this recording with great respect. Respect for the courage that was necessary to sustain the research work in organ energy and life energy all through these years. I shall not go into the great strain, into the details, into the worries, the sleepless nights, the tears, the expenditures in money and effort, the patience which I had to have with all my workers and with all my students. I would like only to mention the fact that there's nobody around, there's not a single soul, either here at Organon or down in New York, who would fully and really, from the bottom of his existence, understand what I'm doing be with me in what I'm doing. They're all very good people. They're decent, honest, hardworking. I trust them. We are very good friends, all of them, or most of them. But this does not alter the fact that they all, without any exception, are against what I am doing. Every single one of them spites me, interferes with my effort, crosses it out, blots out, flattens out, does one thing or another thing, whatever it may be, to diminish my effort, to diminish the effects of my effort, to blot out the sharpness and acuity of my thoughts, to reduce to rubble and nothing, or nothingness, what I have elaborated in about now 33 or 34 years of systematic thinking, and in about 40 years of human suffering since about 1912, or rather 1910 when my mother died. There is not a single soul around who would fully understand or would not say no to it all. This no is identical with I don't want it, I don't like it, I loathe it. Why is it here? Why does he have to exist? Why doesn't he sit down and take it easy? Why did he have to start this Oranur experiment, which gives us so much trouble? They see only the trouble. They don't see, or they don't want to realize what it means for medicine, biology, and science in general, as well as philosophy, to have this Oranur going. To them, it is mostly a bother, an inducer of sickness, suffering, and at times I have the distinct feeling that they believe, though they do not dare quite to admit their own thoughts, that I may have gone haywire. This reaction of my closest friends and co-workers to the situation here is exactly the same that has harassed the human race for as much as we can say 8,000 or 10,000 years, since patriarchy has ruled its destinies and since natural love was extinguished in the newborn infants. I shall not go into that. It's all written up in my publications. Whoever knows these publications also knows what that means. The discovery of the life energy would have been accomplished long ago had this I don't want it, I fear it, I loathe it, I'll kill it, I'll flatten it out, I won't let it live or exist. If that had not been in their structures, not in their desires, not in their positive conscious wishes, they're all decent and good people. No, it is in the structure. It is somehow in their tissues, in their blood. They cannot tolerate anything that has to do with orgone energy or life energy, or what they call God, or what is their deepest longing for love, for fulfillment. they fear it. They fear it by way of structure. Their tissues, their blood, cannot stretch out, cannot take it, evades it, avoids it, and loathes it. I do not say all this to depreciate their efforts, their honor, their loves, their lives. I say it because it is true, because it turns up in every single move, in every single word, in every single opinion, in every single paper, in every single thing they did to whatever ever had to do with the discovery of genitality, life, love. Such people as Lawrence, or such philosophies as Giordano Bruno's, or such great lives as Jesus Christ, and so forth and so forth. It is a sad, lonely chapter of the human race. I don't feel that I am obligated to solve this riddle or to do anything about it. I happen to discover the life energy. I happen to induce the Oranur experiment. I know what it means for the future development of medicine and biology, philosophy and natural science. I'm fully aware of it. And in this awareness, I am completely alone. There's no soul anywhere far and wide to talk to give one's feelings, to let one's feelings go freely, to speak like as friends speak to each other. This is all.